Long before improved fabrics and lightweight pole systems, soldiers on every front, from the Aleutian Islands to the North African deserts, learned a hard truth. Tents failed long before morale did. Canvas soaked through, stakes pulled out, poles snapped, storms didn't care who manufactured the gear. And yet certain units, especially engineers, scouts and forward observers, began using a simple frame-building method that baffled anyone who saw it the first time. These weren't tents in the traditional sense. They were skeletal, wind-defeating structures built from whatever materials the terrain offered. Saplings, scrap beams, driftwood, fence posts, even ruined furniture. The surprising part is this. The soldiers who built these stormproof frames didn't design them out of creativity. They were taught. The method came directly out of pre-war field manuals and engineering schools. It was the same principle used in Arctic exploration huts, early aviation hangars, and some of the fastest-built military bridges. Once you understand the trick, you see why storm winds couldn't topple these structures, even when everything else blew away. This wasn't improvisation. It was engineering boiled down to its simplest form, and, well, it still works today for anyone who needs shelter stronger than any tent. The trick relied on creating a self-locking A-frame that redistributed force instead of resisting it. The core insight of the World War II frame method was that force should be redirected, not fought. Traditional tents rely on vertical poles that absorb wind loads directly, which makes them vulnerable. Soldiers trained in field engineering learned to lash two poles into an A-shape, then lock that A-frame into another A-frame, repeating the pattern until the structure braced itself. This created a skeleton of repeating triangles. Triangles do not collapse under lateral pressure, which is why they are the backbone of aircraft, bridges, and siege engines. The World War II shelter frames used the same mathematics. When the wind hit, the frame dispersed the force across every joint instead of pushing on any single point. The canvas or tarp wasn't there to hold the shelter up. The frame held the fabric up. The fabric simply kept weather out. One of the most useful aspects of the technique is how forgiving it was. Units stationed in Italy built frames from chestnut saplings. Troops in the Pacific used bamboo because it was nearly unbreakable. In northern forests, the frame was often made from spruce or birch. Whatever the wood, the principle stayed the same. The strength came from the angles. Now, footage from the Aleutian campaign, well, it shows wind speeds so high they could send tents tumbling across the landscape just like tumbleweed. Yet somehow the engineers' A-frame shelters stayed rooted in place, even though, honestly, they were built from nothing more than driftwood and a bit of salvage rope. The trick worked, you see, because each piece of wood supported the next. No pole had to carry the load all by itself. The most critical step in this World War II frame trick, really, was the use of cross-bracing. Once the basic A-frame stood upright, soldiers would run horizontal poles along the sides, locking all the frames together. Then they added diagonal braces, often just thinner branches, tying the structure into a rigid lattice. Anchoring was equally important. Instead of simple stakes, field manuals advised digging shallow trenches for the base logs so the ground itself became part of the support. In muddy or sandy terrain, troops buried cross stakes below the surface and tied the frame to them, a method still used in modern expedition shelters. Some units in the tropics even use living roots as natural anchors. This made the shelter behave like a low-profile truss bridge. It didn't matter if gale-force winds blasted it. The shelter didn't try to resist the wind. It transferred the pressure through the frame and into the earth. The value of this World War II trick isn't just historical. Anyone building an off-grid or emergency shelter can use the exact same method. One practical example is constructing a storm-resistant lean-to for long-term use. Start with 2 A-frames made from sturdy poles. Add a ridgepole across the top. Then add a second pair of A-frames for extra support. Once you lock the frames together with side rails and diagonal braces, you have a skeleton far stronger than anything a tent can offer. Cover it with a tarp, hides, brush, or even sheet metal, and it will withstand punishing winds. Another application is for homesteaders who want a temporary livestock shelter or equipment shed. Using the World War II A-frame trick, a person can build a structure within just a few hours that will stand for several months, even in, pretty harsh weather. Many modern bushcrafters use it to build long-term base camps, especially in areas where storms regularly knock down lightweight tents. A more advanced example is using the trick to reinforce an existing tent. By building a simple A-frame skeleton and pitching the tent inside it, you gain the portability of a tent with the storm resistance of military engineering. This hybrid approach is, pretty common among expedition trekkers on long Arctic or mountain routes. Modern survival manuals often treat these shelters as bushcraft skills or clever hacks, but actually, World War II soldiers used them as standard procedure. Field engineers, commandos, long-range patrols and Arctic units didn't just make shelters, they made engineered structures that, maximised geometry and physics. When everything else failed, these frames didn't. Many veterans later recounted seeing their tents shredded by storms, only to find the stormproof frame beneath it still standing. These shelters weren't glamorous, but they were lifesavers. They were designed for the harsh reality of war, where a collapsed shelter could lead to hypothermia, lost equipment, or mission failure. The same principles still matter for anyone who spends time in remote landscapes today. If you want more forgotten skills, wartime ingenuity, and ancient techniques that still outperform modern gear, make sure to subscribe, share this video with others, and help keep these powerful pieces of history alive.